It is my absolute pleasure to be joined today by author AJ Mensch. He is the author of the newly released book, An Airline Pilot's Final Flight to Sobriety. So, AJ, tell us about this book.
Well, it's an 80-page narrative memoir. You're on a metaphorical flight, which I invite the readers to join with me. And we're going to go on a flight spanning my 40 years of aviation, starting in the United States Navy, chasing Soviet submarines off the USS Enterprise. And then we're going to continue the flight chasing drug runners at the United States Customs Service out of Homestead Air Force Base in Miami. And then we're going to continue the flight for 30 years with a major airline. And we're going to go on a lot of layovers in Amsterdam, Paris, Rome, London, um, all with alcohol as my friend. I would like to say I never flew under the influence and I never got a DUI. I was a functional drinker. Um, and so I lay all that out in the book. And I also say, that the seatbelt signs on, the smoking, no smoking, but there's one other thing that we have to do on this flight, and that's this is a no judgment zone. So I'm not judging anyone that drinks. There's a big continuum of non-drinkers to social drinkers to moderate drinkers to heavy drinkers. I unpack that a little later on the flight that I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And there's, nature versus nurture. I get into that, but it's a very short book. A lot of my friends and family read it in an hour. And I must say, they said a lot of them said couldn't put it down. So anyway, it's 6 chapters. The chapters are takeoff, climb, cruise, descent, approach, and landing. Landing corresponds to my 2-year sobriety date. I start out in my boyhood on Long Island and my college days at Holy Cross, and then Navy flight school. And I go through, there's a lot of flashbacks. And all of a sudden, you're on the USS Enterprise, and there's a crewman getting ingested by a jet engine. And then we're back on the flight. And then I'll talk about my flying at United States Customs Service, where one of my very good friends got killed one night in a Black Hawk crash chasing drug runners. So I ended up getting some PTSD because I had a lot of grief that I stuffed over decades and did not get in touch. I had a therapist at the VA who helped me unpack a lot of things that I had not grieved. Like when the guy got ingested in a jet engine, I thought we'd secure flight ops, have a chapel service with the chaplain. But no, it was just fly an hour later, clean the deck up from the mess. And before flight school, I was awaiting my flight seat at Pensacola. I was stationed at NAS Brunswick in Maine, and a plane P3 went down in 1979 and lost all souls on board. I, for some reason, was called out to go on that crash site, even though I just had a desk job. And that was very traumatic. I talk about that in the book. And I basically spent all that time flying with fear of a midair collision, which I was in. And so then that was in the Navy off the carrier. I was in a bona fide near midair collision. And that affected me throughout my whole flying career, as well as the P3 that blew up in midair. There was a fuel leak with an electrical spark, and et cetera, et cetera. And those things were deep in my spirit. And I don't always think that could happen on a flight. And we're talking decades of flying. But of course, the book is about addiction and recovery. And so I learned through therapy with the VA and elsewhere that a lot of us, as we all know, but we stuff our emotions, we stuff our suffering, whether it's divorce, sexual abuse, whether it's whatever. The list is so long. We tend to smoke, drink, overeat. My drug of choice was alcohol. I and We relieve stress after missions, and we just drink too much, and these habits can become very embedded, deeply rooted patterns of behavior. And So the book just, it's kind of a fast read. I get into it. I have a short chapter on PTSD, and the work that we have to do to peel back the onions and get in touch with these issues and like be okay with feeling our feelings and not stuffing them. So I end the book saying that, it's not like I've arrived. I'm a Christian. It's not a Christian book per se. In 12 steps they talk about your higher power. I did a program called Celebrate Recovery where our higher power is the Lord. I do weave in my faith journey throughout the narrative, and in a non-preachy fashion, if I may say. And so that's kind of a overview of what the book is about. And um,
I think
I'm
that's
very happy.
amazing. Um, First of all, I want to say thank you for your service. I think that that is always one of the most important things that people need to recognize, and that they need to understand that things happen when people sacrifice and serve, and that that trauma can carry forward. And so we need to make sure that we honor our veterans in every way that we can, because their sacrifice is what allows us to live the life that we have today. So thank you for your service. Also, thank you for writing such a raw and real book. I mean, you're right. Everyone has trauma. Everyone does. Everyone has some coping mechanism that they reach for, to help with that trauma. And I
Yeah,
think more people like you that are brave and come forward and say, look, this is what I deal with. I just think it makes it easier for the world to come out and say that as well. And so thank you for that. And
thank
what
you,
was that
Stacey.
main point of inspiration where you're like, I have got to write this book. I have to put this in book form. I've got to write this book.
First of all, thank you, Stacey, for the shout out to veterans in the service and what you just shared about taking care of our veterans in this area. Um, in terms of the inspiration for the book, Stacey, I just felt like I wanted to help people and share my story. Everyone's story, everyone has a story. I started this book as a journal when I was in Celebrate Recovery, but I was inspired. One of my daughters read it and thought it should be, published or put into a book, and I just felt like I really maybe can help a few people out there, just to show them that, you know, my story is a story where it took, me 45 years to break a behavioral pattern, and that it's possible. So it's a hopeful story. Anyone can. I know people have a lot worse trauma, much worse than I did, but trauma is trauma, grief is grief, whether someone's going through a divorce, drinking a lot. And I just wanted to expose and unpack two big, I'm going to call them lies that I believed, Stacey. And just briefly, one is a lie. I just believe from a very early age, when I first had my first beer, it's in the book, my love affair begins in the back of my 1973 Mustang. A friend of mine gives me a Budweiser beer, and I felt giddy. And even though I didn't have any problems, pardon me, I felt like this is a good feeling, it's just, and I just wanted to unpack. I connected in my brain that I could only really have fun, like by drinking with my buddies. And then in retirement, we'd fish, we'd surf, we'd boat with all my buddies, always saturated with alcohol. And I have a chapter in the book where I talk about my first kayak in like 25 years without a beer, and how the dolphins looked more beautiful, and it was just like the color glasses were like I was seeing things like alcohol free. It sounds so hokey, but like and I learned that that is a lie, that we can actually have fun. I talk about how in the book, God made us. The best days of my life were when I was a young boy, like 10, 12, running around on my uncle's farm in Vermont, fishing, and sleeping out under the stars. We weren't drinking back then as kids. Yeah. And so I feel like um, that's the one lie, that we can have fun. And in fact, we can have more fun because we're not like hung over in the morning when we drink too much, and we can get up and do an early morning bike ride or a devotion, whatever. The second thing I wanted to unpack and expose, the second lie, is that we we need to learn, in my opinion. I did not know that. I thought the only way to medicate pain, suffering, stress, trauma was through my drug of choice, which was alcohol. I didn't have the high awareness level that I was doing that. It was like a mess. I didn't realize that until I was in therapy, how deeply embedded that was, that habit, that addiction. And when we stop the substance and we spend the time and the hard work through therapy, through whatever groups and counseling and God's grace, we can live a more fulfilled life, I believe, by getting in touch with the issues, grieving that sailor that was ingested in 1982, doing it now in 2024, doing the work, letting that sailor go. The lives that I saw in the wreckage in Brunswick, Maine, I can pray for their kids and their spouses, even though I never knew those men. And I can get in touch and let that go. The pain of a divorce, but it's work. A lot of us don't want to do the behavioral change. We human beings don't like it, but we can do it. And there's freedom. It's very hopeful. And I'm very grateful that the shame has been taken back from a lot of these things. Like breast cancer wasn't even talked about, 40 years ago. These things were all swept under the carpet. So I think there's been a lot of good things happening out there in terms of talking about these difficult subjects. And I'm hoping, Stacy, that, a few readers will just maybe pause after reading my book and maybe have some newly founded inspiration from my story.
I think that's incredible. And the book is incredible. I think you are incredible.
Thank
And,
you.
and we want to let
Yeah.
everyone know everyone can get something out of this book. Everyone has faced trauma. Everyone has faced something, and we've all found coping mechanisms to deal with things. And so I think this book is really important. So we want to make sure everyone knows that this book is available everywhere online that books are sold. It's available on Amazon and online at Barnes and Noble, Reader House, Apple Books. It's available all those places. And you are wonderful. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you, Stacy, for listening to my story. Thank you.